What happens when your daughter becomes famous overnight, but never comes home again? This is the story of influencers, a mysterious pastor, and a growing cult in plain sight. To understand how a group of TikTok dancers praised for their talent and clean image ended up at the center of one of the most bizarre and unsettling cult allegations in recent history, we have to start with one man. A pastor, a businessman. A man with many names but only one true agenda. His name is Robert Shin. Born in South Korea and raised in the United States, Robert Shin wasn't always a figure surrounded by controversy. In fact, for over 2 decades, he ran a little-known church in Los Angeles called Shekinah Church. A non-denominational Christian congregation with a quiet footprint, but a reputation for intensity. He wasn't like most pastors I'd known. His sermons weren't just about hope, they were about control, about spiritual warfare, about the end of the world. And he made you feel like you needed him to survive it. Shin styled himself as a prophet, someone with divine insight and direct revelation. Members were told that obedience to the prophet was a form of obedience to God himself. Over time, those teachings took a darker turn, focusing less on faith and more on allegiance. According to multiple former members, Shin encouraged separation from outside influences. That included friendships, family ties, and romantic relationships not approved by the church. He'd say, if they're not with God's plan for you, they're a distraction. Cut them off. And that's exactly what we did. We thought it was spiritual discipline, but it was grooming. By the late 2010s, Robert Shin began expanding his influence beyond the church pew. With the rise of Instagram and TikTok, a new opportunity emerged, one that would make his flock not just loyal, but profitable. 7M Films was founded in 2021, with Robert Shin listed as co-founder and CEO. The name stood for 7 Mountains of Influence, a concept rooted in Christian dominion theology. The idea? That Christians are called to dominate 7 areas of society: government, education, media, arts and entertainment, religion, family, and business. Shin's version of this vision involved transforming his church into a talent agency, one that exclusively managed influencers who were also his spiritual followers. These weren't just any influencers. They were some of the most viral dancers on TikTok. Millions of followers, billions of views, and all of it under one roof. 7M Films? But behind the glamour was a hidden doctrine, a spiritual leash, and the man holding it was still Robert Shin. This is what we call spiritual manipulation for material gain. Robert Shin didn't just want to guide these dancers spiritually. He wanted to own their image, their voice, and their income. It's textbook authoritarian control dressed up as mentorship. According to multiple sources, Shin required his influencers to tithe heavily, sometimes more than 20% of their income, back to his church or affiliated LLCs. Contracts were allegedly coercive. Leaving the agency often meant not just losing your career, but your spiritual covering. We didn't sign a contract. We signed our lives away. What started as a faith-based community was now beginning to look like something else. Something darker. And it would take a family tragedy, a public call for help, and a chorus of brave survivors to bring that darkness into the light. To the outside world, 7M Films was a modern-day success story. A Christian-run talent agency that turned passionate dancers into viral sensations. But within the glossy aesthetics and glittering choreography lay a disturbing reality. These weren't just content creators. They were the products of a system that blended spiritual obedience with financial exploitation. And at the center of that system was Robert Shin. In early 2021, 7M Films exploded online. Their content felt different, coordinated, polished, and frequent. Multiple dancers were living together in creator houses, producing daily content that amassed millions of views. But these weren't just business relationships. They were discipleships. The dancers were all part of Robert Shin's Shekinah Church, a ministry that taught members to submit to leadership as if obeying the voice of God. You couldn't make decisions without him, career, relationships, even what you wore. He said modesty was spiritual warfare, but it was control, plain and simple. With the launch of 7M, church teachings were no longer confined to Sunday services. They became infused into contracts, living arrangements, and career goals. The spiritual mentor now also decided your brand deals. Multiple former members say the dancers were pressured to sign contracts that gave 7M significant control over their income, image, and schedule. One source claimed the dancers had to give a cut of every deal, up to 30%, plus another 10% to the church. And these weren't just TikTokers hoping for fame. They were chosen, often from within the church, groomed for years under Shin's leadership, and told their dancing was a ministry unto God. This is what we call coercive influence. When someone's identity is wrapped in both faith and financial dependency, they become easier to control. And the reward? Fame, followers, a global audience. But the price? Autonomy. At the heart of this machine was Miranda Derrick, perhaps the most visible face of 7M. Miranda was born Miranda Wilking, one half of the Wilking sisters, a dance duo from Michigan who rose to TikTok fame during the pandemic. Their synchronized dances and wholesome image made them fan favorites. But in 2021, something shifted. Miranda began pulling away not just from social media, but from her family. According to her parents and sister, she stopped replying to calls, canceled holidays, and when they asked about her new church, she was evasive. In early 2022, the family went public. "She is not free. This is a cult," mother of Miranda. "We are reaching out because we fear she is being manipulated and isolated." Sister Melanie. The live stream went viral. Millions watched as the Wilkings begged the internet to help bring Miranda back. But Miranda responded, not to them, but through a carefully crafted video on Instagram, stating she was fine, happy, and not in a cult. But former 7M members say she wasn't fine. One dancer said Miranda's new husband, fellow 7M influencer James B. Derrick was being used as a form of spiritual leverage. They said marriage was holy, but it was arranged. It was a way to lock people in. Once you were married in the church, leaving meant spiritual death. What made it even harder for the Wilkings to reach Miranda was 7M's internal system. Members lived together, ate together, worshiped together, and worked only with 7M-approved partners. There was no outside influence. No one allowed to interrupt the loop. By now, Miranda wasn't just part of a brand. She was the brand. And the deeper she got into 7M, the more her old life began to fade. Family, friends, freedom. They tell you you're blessed, chosen, but the only thing you are is trapped. They promised us a platform for God. What they built was a stage for manipulation. And as the Wilking family pleaded for answers, the public began to dig deeper. What they uncovered was a web of lawsuits, NDAs, church abuse allegations, and hidden bank accounts. In 2021, TikTok saw a new star rise. She was graceful, electric, radiant. Miranda Derrick became the face of a new era of dance influencers. But behind the filters, edits, and camera-ready smiles, her family was falling apart. Her follower count exploded. Each video reached millions. She danced in lavish homes, on rooftop studios, at brand-sponsored events. With each choreographed clip, Miranda seemed unstoppable. But while fans followed her every move, her family couldn't even get a call back. The Wilking family had watched Miranda grow up dancing. She and her sister Melanie were inseparable, a sister duo with natural chemistry and strong family ties. But something changed in 2021. Miranda began pulling away. She stopped answering texts, skipped out on holidays, and even missed her grandfather's funeral, all without explanation. She didn't even call. We couldn't understand it. It wasn't like her. It wasn't Miranda. It wasn't just emotional distance. It was total estrangement. Family members began to suspect something deeper, something darker. They learned Miranda was now heavily involved in a group called 7M, linked to Shekinah Church and led by Robert Shin. When we found out about 7M, we started connecting the dots. It wasn't just a management agency. It was spiritual manipulation disguised as a career opportunity. But things hit a breaking point when Miranda skipped the funeral of her own father. The Wilkings say they begged Miranda to come, but she never showed up, and never explained why. It was this moment that led the Wilking family to go public. In early 2022, they launched a now viral TikTok live pleading for help and warning others of what they called a modern-day cult. This is not normal behavior. This is not Miranda. This is manipulation. We are afraid she is not safe. The internet exploded. Overnight, #FreeMiranda began trending. But while the public rallied, Miranda stayed silent. To some, her video seemed reassuring, but to others, it only raised more red flags. That video? That wasn't her speaking. That was Robert's script. Behind the camera, 7M Films doubled down on content. Miranda continued dancing, smiling, thriving, at least on the surface. But more and more people were asking, was she actually free? Or had her TikTok career become a beautifully choreographed prison? By mid-2022, something began to shift. The silence surrounding 7M wasn't just cracked, it shattered. Former dancers, former staff, even worshippers from Shekinah Church started coming forward, anonymously at first, then publicly. One by one, they confirmed what many feared. This wasn't just a talent agency, it was a system of control. You sign the NDA, you hand over your passwords. Then the spiritual manipulation starts. Everything you do is for God, but really, it's for Robert. Several dancers reported being locked into binding contracts that gave 7M and Shin's church total control over their finances. Paychecks were rerouted. Tax documents were withheld. One member claims they were forced to tithe nearly 50% of their earnings, on top of mandatory gifts to leadership. New allegations described a watchdog structure where dancers were required to log their activities hourly. One said they were required to send selfie check-ins when they left home, and to report phone calls with outsiders, including family. Family restrictions weren't just encouraged, they were systemized. One former dancer revealed a document from 7M explicitly stating that outside relationships could hinder spiritual alignment and success. They were instructed to ghost non-members who questioned the anointing. I was told God would punish me if I left. I wasn't just leaving a company. I was betraying the divine plan. One of the more chilling allegations? Members who attempted to leave were told they'd be cursed. Several described sudden illnesses, panic attacks, or accidents, which Shin's leadership framed as divine consequences. Some stayed, terrified of what would happen if they didn't. A leaked sermon recording from Shekinah described outsiders, especially family, as satanic distractions sent to destroy destiny. Members were encouraged to die to self, which in practice meant no questions, no complaints, no escape. And yet, a few did escape. A few found the courage to speak. And as their stories reached the media, lawsuits began to mount. For months, there were only whispers, anonymous tips, heartbreaking testimonies on forums and podcasts. But in 2023, silence turned into subpoenas. The veil was lifted. And the battle to hold Robert Shin accountable began. A group of former dancers, most of whom had once been among 7M's rising stars, filed a civil lawsuit in California Superior Court. The target, Robert Shin, 7M Films, and Shekinah Church. Plaintiffs claimed they were coerced into working 16-hour days without pay, producing content, dancing at events, attending rehearsals, and performing outreach under the guise of ministry. Members alleged they were psychologically manipulated using scripture, prophetic fear tactics, and threats of divine punishment to suppress resistance and maintain obedience. Many dancers were young, struggling artists when they joined. The lawsuit alleges they were intentionally recruited in moments of financial or emotional vulnerability and trapped through debt, contracts, and isolation. The case frames 7M as a modern-day cult with a Hollywood aesthetic. Not robes and candles, but NDAs, TikTok accounts, and luxury mansions. Its control with an influencer filter. Court filings revealed harrowing details. Members being forced to share personal trauma in spiritual audits. Threats of divine curses if they disobeyed Shin's orders. Financial accounts frozen for questioning leadership. Robert Shin and his legal team denied all allegations. In a press statement, they called the lawsuit a gross distortion of spiritual mentorship and accused the plaintiffs of coordinated defamation. But that wasn't all. Shin went on the offensive, filing countersuits against some of the former members, claiming breach of contract and defamation. Several ex-members reported receiving cease and desist letters and warnings not to speak to the press. Some even said anonymous threats appeared in their DMs, hinting at surveillance and consequences for betrayal. What we're dealing with is an organization built on coercion, fueled by fear, and disguised as faith. This isn't just a labor dispute, it's psychological warfare. As the court battle heated up, so did public attention. But while some backed away in fear, others stepped into the spotlight, determined to finish what they started. By now, the facts are undeniable. But beneath the headlines and hashtags lies a darker truth, a carefully constructed psychological prison. To understand how a dance company could become a cage, we turn to the experts. Dr. Emily Price, cult recovery psychologist, said, "These groups don't just demand obedience, they dissolve your ability to choose. The control is invisible, but it's absolute. Members are slowly taught to replace critical thinking with spiritual discernment. Dissent becomes sin, and questioning is framed as betrayal, not of the leader, but of God. Instead of external punishment, members fear internal failure. They're trained to believe that their dreams, salvation, and very purpose are inseparable from the group. There is so much control, not just physical, digital too. Control over social media, messages filtered through leadership, outside influences labeled demonic or deceptive. This isn't just manipulation, it's reprogramming. And for young, ambitious creatives, the bait is especially effective. Another cult expert, Rick Alan Ross, talked about this from the love bombing angle. Love bombing is common, especially in cults that target performers. They shower new members with praise, promises, and attention. You're made to feel chosen, special, until the curtain drops. Once loyalty is secured, that same love becomes conditional, used to reward submission or punish resistance. Former members describe a culture of spiritual surveillance, where even thoughts were policed through group confessions, prophetic readings, and rehearsals guided by the Spirit. It wasn't about control of behavior alone, it was control of identity. Who you were, what you valued, who you were allowed to become. To many experts, 7M Films bears striking resemblance to high-profile cults, like NXIVM and Scientology. Like NXIVM, it blended ambition with abuse, promising career breakthroughs while extracting total allegiance. Like Scientology, it created a tiered spiritual hierarchy, with escalating commitments and an inner circle who knew more, obeyed more, and lost more. Dr. Emily Price said, "It's a cult for the social media age, filtered, stylized, and dangerous." From the outside, it looked like a talent agency. Inside, it was a house of mirrors, built on belief, blurred by charisma, and sustained by silence. The advocacy began to have people talking about their journey of healing. Leaving felt like dying. You don't just leave a church or a manager, you leave your purpose, your calling, your entire circle. But I knew I had to remember who I was before all of it. One of the former members said, the second one said, "I didn't know how to live without asking for permission. I've forgotten how to think on my own." Everything, even eating, sleeping, or resting, had become spiritual warfare. Then, after finally leaving, came grief. What followed wasn't peace. It was confusion, fear, and grief. Experts call it post-cult trauma, a disorientation of identity and trust. Survivors often struggle with decision paralysis, persistent guilt, and distrust of their own instincts, says Dr. Monica Reeves, trauma recovery specialist. It's like learning to walk again with legs you forgot were yours. A member confessed that there were nights I woke up crying because I dreamed I was back in that house. It's not over just because you've escaped. The healing, that's the real fight. But in the darkness, there were breakthroughs, moments of light, of clarity, of reconnection. Some families were reunited, others are still waiting. But the message is clear, the door home is still open. More people spoke about their healing. Healing meant deleting verses they used against me and finding the God I knew before they gave him a name I didn't recognize. For the first time in years, I choreographed something just for me. Not for the kingdom, not for an algorithm, for me. But one question still echoes through every interview and every courtroom. How did this happen in plain sight? As the dust settles, the world keeps watching, but this story is far from over. Despite a flood of headlines and a family's desperate pleas, Miranda Derrick remains with 7M Films, her brand growing, but her voice absent. She no longer speaks publicly about the allegations. No statements, no direct replies. Just dance in silence. In some cases, even after a group is exposed, individuals stay. Not out of loyalty, but because leaving would mean rebuilding an identity from scratch. The court case is headed to trial in 2025. A legal showdown that could redefine how the law treats influencer exploitation and spiritual coercion. Despite legal action and media firestorms, Robert Shin remains at the pulpit, delivering weekly sermons, defending his name, and preaching to a dwindling but devoted flock. Cults don't collapse overnight. They evolve, rebrand, adapt. And often, They rebuild unless the roots are completely exposed. These groups don't always look like we expect. There's no chanting in robes. There are likes, contracts, sermons disguised as branding meetings. If you or someone you know is caught in a situation like this, there is help. Organizations like the ICSA Cult Recovery Network and faith-based abuse support lines are available. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth documentaries about crimes around the world.